I'm not doing very well, am I? Let's start that again. Hello and welcome to O-Day. Phase change. Cohering. My name is Bob Greenyer and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. So welcome this 2nd of November 2025, where we will be discussing some very, very interesting experiments. So how is everyone? Stephen F., David A. Norris, Joe Villacci, Mark Alexander is in the house, James HL, not HL, whatever that means. Yon does life, Anthony Williams, Nathan Ford, we have a good quorum already, 66. Let's try and get that up to 69. You know I love that number. Hi. Benenata. We have remembered people from all over the world here. This is wonderful, wonderful to see you. What I'm going to share with you tonight is a presentation I saw nearly a couple of weeks ago. I tried a week and a half ago. I tried very hard to get it ready for you last weekend, and that failed, and so I didn't actually do a presentation, as you might have been aware, last weekend. And I have got it to a point where I think you will get the main points. I'm pretty sure you will. You're an intelligent bunch. And it's irresponsible to hold on to it any longer, because the significance of these several very simple experiments is so profound. And of course, you'll understand why I liked what has happened in these experiments. But if they are able to be replicated, and there are many of you that could replicate this very, very easily, I'm sure, they help us understand what we have been seeing, or support what we have been seeing in physical experiments. And they point to many things that I have discussed over the years, and it's really rather exciting. So before we go into that, there's a couple of pieces of news that I want to share. And unfortunately, it's not all happy news. That is the way of these things. The first thing is that one Melvin Miles has passed away. He died, as I understand it, on October the 20th, 2025, aged 88. So be happy for his good years that he achieved. That is quite some margin. I hope to live to 88. I like the number 88. So that is absolutely a grand old age. And I actually met him at ICCF 20 in Sendai in Japan in 2016, I believe it was, where I recorded, and you can see the link at the bottom of the channel page there, the video rather, on the MFMP's YouTube channel, where he was talking about Iraj Parchamazad, and this is the guy that used zeolites, where you could trap electrostatic fields of millions of volts per meter in there. He was born in 1937, and he was a pioneering LENR researcher. Born in St. George, Utah. And he got his doctorship, PhD, in physical chemistry at the University of Utah. And he conducted research at the U.S. Naval Air Weapons Station in China Lake, Los Alamos National Laboratory. And he was an adjunct professor at the University of Louvain. He was actually known as a key cold fusion researcher, and he actually verified cold fusion. So perhaps he did that whilst he was working at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And one of his big contributions was to advance reproducibility, which has always been something that has been a criticism of the field. And he had a patent actually awarded, I believe, in 2004. He was a personal friend of Martin Fleischmann, after which this channel is named, the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. And actually, if you go and look at leonardcanner.org, Jed Rothwell has published a whole series of letters, discussing this technology between Martin Fleischmann and Melvin Miles. So I recommend for those that need some interesting reading at some point that they go and have a look at that. I believe the last ICCF conference he attended was ICCF 24. I was unable to attend that because of the nonsense, because it was in July 2022 at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California. I was gutted I could not attend, but I would have had to have submitted my body to an experiment, which I was unwilling to do. However, he was able to attend, being stateside, and as I understand it, because he did actually co-author a presentation and a poster, and I think he probably was there. I don't know for certain, actually, to be honest. But definitely he was in Sendai, in Japan. Actually, that was the first time I went to Japan. And yes, I recorded his presentation. I found it particularly interesting. At that time in 2016, I was not really very familiar with the concepts that I am familiar with now. So may he rest in peace, and I hope you'd all send your love and best vibes to his family. Time waits for no man, but it's what you do that matters. He wasn't the only person to die on October 20th, 2025. Another person was Dennis Bushnell. Unfortunately, he died at 84. Not quite the advanced years of Melvin Miles, but very close. And there he is in 2016, I believe, himself, talking about his work on the Apollo program. And he was born in 1941. And he's credited as being a visionary NASA scientist, and he was renowned for pioneering aerospace innovations. He worked for 60 years at NASA Langley Research Center, and he served as their chief scientist for more than 20 years, until he retired just in 2023. Thank you very much, Gary Johnson. That's really very appreciated. So, what did he work in, Dennis Bushnell? He worked apparently in hypersonics. He also worked, interestingly, in neurotechnology. Interesting. Why would you want to work in neurotechnology as a chief scientist for NASA? Very interesting. He also worked, along with hypersonics and neurotechnology, interestingly, in future warfare strategies. And yes, he passed away on October the 20th, the same day. He was a leading proponent of the Widom-Larsen hypothesis, alongside Stephen Crivet, who's been a battle warrior in dealing with nature, in the cavitation paper that we published with Bintuan Huang, finding out the scam, the deep scam of peer review. And that's another story for another day. And he says that on the surface you get these electrons that get into a state where they form heavy electrons, whatever that means, and you get a weak driven process. So whilst it is not the ideas of Alexander Parkhomov, it is a weak process, and whilst it's not Ken Shoulders or Stephen E. Crivet, it does have an electron effect, and Stephen E. Crivet said the electrons do something that allows them to form a quasi-particle that does the action. So I think people are circling around the same drain to get to an explanation, and he believed in a specific theory called the Widom-Larsen hypothesis. I had the pleasure and the honor of having a deep interchange with him last year, in August, in fact, regarding cavitation and some of my presentations on cavitation and our paper in Nature. So I'm going to read a couple of things that he said in those communications and how it was left. There's never enough time. There never is enough time. So he said, so thank you for the education. There is a need to get updated with respect to cavitation fusion. He then goes on to note that he worked with the Navy folk on this type of research years ago. So years ago, from me being a co-author on the paper in Nature Scientific Reports, years from that, before that, he was working with the Navy on that type of research. He goes on to say, and he likes to speak in a kind of shorthand. I think it's efficiency that you have to do when you're running a big team and delegating and you're working with very competent people and you can cut to just the chase. He also likes to use capitals when he's making a kind of an emphasis. He says, I am amazed that someone with deep pockets has not been working on this, that is cavitation, for fusion by now. This is someone who worked with the Navy on this. Doing the real-world engineering optimization. Well, I have to say, I think that is occurring with Binzer and Huang in terms of the injectors, the resonant injectors. I don't think it's being done sufficiently with rotary cavitators, although I do know my colleague in Kazakhstan, Vladimirovich Zhigalov, is actually working on a 70 kilowatt cavitator at the moment and studying that there in Kazakhstan. I hope to go and visit him and see how he's getting on with that. Anyway, he goes on. The high energy fusion folks are not getting much of anywhere. And aside from cavitation, neither are the low energy fusion folks. Still not clear what the ultimate COP, coefficient of performance, is, nor the alpha, that is to say, the kilograms per kilowatt ratio. Lena is about 2, reactors about 30 plus, I think he's referring to nuclear reactors there. Cavitation should be in between. Cavitation should be in between, somewhere between the reported data for Lena and the reported data for a nuclear reactor. The hot fusion, I would assume, nuclear reactor. He says that the major problem with fission and fusion, even cavitation fusion, and he literally calls it cavitation fusion, are cost and time. And then he goes into full capitals rant here. At the scale and current advanced state of the climate, it would take too long to produce enough plants to do much of any good. Well, I think we're going to look at that kind of narrative in a few seconds. Anyway, also, the cost of renewables and storage continue to plummet and are already far below nuclear energy. Why nukes have been closing, that and age. He says that last he heard of, 89 of the original 109 nuclear facilities, that is nuclear generation fission generators in the US, are still operating. So that's 89 out of 109, but they are being reviewed. So he then goes on in a separate email. So, okay, so you've had fun playing with cavitation fusion. What next? It needs to have optimization and it needs research and funding to do that. It needs scaling and engineering studies, after which there is the greatest issue, cost. The greatest issue, cost. So I'm doing my best to work with Binzer and Huang to enable those kind of engineering studies from my perspective, what I can do. That is working on his kind of methodology, but as I say, there needs to be more work on cavitation in the form of hydrosonic type devices. He then talks about his own technology, which he calls his gamma battery. Now, we've all heard of the beta battery using the 100-year isotope of nickel-63 that's produced in a nuclear reactor. But he says his gamma battery scales from watts to megawatts, and it has an alpha of 1. And he says that he can easily take in the nuclear waste. With civilian and military waste, there are enough. That is to say, 85% of the energy is still in the waste, in this civilian and military waste, to power the US grid for 100 years. He is saying that using the technology he has, he can take the waste that's currently present from the domestic, civilian and the military programs in the US and power the US grid for 100 years. He says, we are doing optimization with isotopes experiments to determine whether the NTAC generation approach, that is using the weak force, and he's saying that the weak force approach is 10,000 times chemical energy, and this does sound a little like some other technologies that are being claimed, can compete cost-wise with renewables and storage for the grid going forward. So, yeah, he's saying he has a weak force-based technology. Again, he's a Widom-Larsen fan, or was, and that it can take nuclear waste and make release the energy from that. Now, I'll come on to a little bit about why he thinks that's possible, but there was my last series of emails with him on Monday, the 5th of August, 2024. And he replies to an email from me. He says, all is as I expected. Have nanoasperites where via quantum tunneling surface energy is collected at levels of up to 1,000 times amplification. Collective effects occur which create heavy electrons, producing ultra-weak neutrons, which start isotope cascades. So this is really the Widom-Larsen theory. I'll give you his picture back. He's looking right at you. Producing transmutation and gamma, which is converted by the heavy electron electric fields into heat. Thousands of degrees in these cracks. So he's talking about cracks like you get in the discussion I had with Dr. Edmund Storms, the whole nuclear active environment of Dr. Edmund Storms. He's saying that within these cracks you get thousands of degrees. But in those cracks also you get nuclear cascades. This is also what Dr. Edmund Storms is saying. But Dr. Edmund Storms is saying that the principal reaction in the case of DD fusion is 4 hydrogen with a specific mass that leads to interactions with the matter in the surrounding area. That is a theory. But if you had these, what are these heavy electrons? Are the heavy electrons the kind of quasi-particle proposed by Stephen E. Jones 35 days after Pons and Fleischmann made their announcement? And I do like the fact that he uses the term collective effects occur. Collective effects in the production of these so-called heavy electrons. Now, of course, Ken Shoulders would refer to an exotic vacuum object itself as a kind of heavy electron. That is to say, it can be billions of the masses of an electron, but only have kind of the one single half spin charge and one negative charge. So half spin and a single negative charge. So a lot of thinking in that line. He says, what actually happens, which transmutation occurs, what materials are extant after the volcano is formed at the site is a function of the conditions. Materials present inducing at trace level, including at trace levels, which the thousands of degrees weak force reaction systems then interacts with. So such results as you ask me to comment on are individual experimental details specific. He says, I hope this helps. What I expect to happen is a result of the heat production weak force process, not part of it. Yeah, so this is very similar to the conversation I had with Dr. Edmund Storms, is that he's saying that the transmutations are actually a result of the weak force process. In Dr. Edmund Storms, it's a so-called conversion of one of the protons to a neutron, which kind of sounds a bit weak forcey to me, but he doesn't like to go there, and he doesn't like to call it specifically electron capture. But anyway, and then it's the products that come out that do the reaction. It's not coherent in the sense that I believe we're observing in these massive structures, these exotic vacuum objects. Anyway, like I say, there's many ways to skin a cat. He says, write a summary, and this is where I kind of regret. Shouldn't have regrets, but I do. At the time, I was trying to help Malcolm Bendel and people around Malcolm Bendel understand Malcolm Bendel's technology, and trying to support him over in the US. And this is the last email he sent to me that day, and it said, write a summary and I will send to an energy zealot with connections. See what he says about going somewhere with this. For some 25 years, I consulted for the National Intelligence Council, wrote power and energy briefs for the nation. I know where the bodies are buried and the lay of the land worldwide. He was offering to send any proposals and data to the most key individuals in the land to see if they could support a systematic study. And I was too engaged trying to get a technology off the ground. So, you know, I'm doing the best job I can. But it's not all bad news. So thank you to Dennis Bushnell for his service to the nation of the United States of America, for his service to science and being part of the NASA programs there. My heart goes out to his family for their loss, and I hope you send good vibes out there as well. So it's not all bad news. There was some huge, really good news. As you know, my story my life started shortly after the so-called global warming narrative was hatched. I believed it for most of my life. I took big sacrifices in my life because of it. But I am happy to report that just 8 days after these two greats of the field of LENR and of major science in general passed on, that a person known to many people here, possibly on October the 28th, 2025, started sounding the death knell for global boiling, I think it was called last year. Global boiling. Okay? And I'm a little bit cynical about why this occurred. I wrote a little phrase here that I will read out that gives my opinion. I said, when there was huge globs of state funding for green, in inverted commas, initiatives, the sanctimonious lined up to pledge allegiance to the narrative. Now that support is drying up all over the world, and artificial intelligence, the next conversion of the collective wealth into the elite wealth, is demanding vast amounts of energy and other resources. They are all about bringing on more large baseload energy resources to feed the machines. Thank you very much, Skoggy Hoggins, for that £20. Very, very appreciated. Yes, so apparently Bill Gates made a statement in an essay, I think it was published in The Guardian, 3 Tough Truths About Climate, was his title for the article, if you want to go and look it up. And it was published on Gates' Note for the Day, actually. And he argued for strategic pivot, i.e. I'm not getting big handouts for talking about green stuff anymore. Call me a cynic. In global climate efforts, emphasizing that the strategy should prioritize human welfare, including prosperity and health, okay, over metrics like emissions reductions or temperature limits. Yeah, so because it's difficult to work with certain jurisdictions of the world when they're belching out vast amounts of emissions, where basically if everyone was to commit harry-carry and pass away, in the entire of Europe, it would basically make no difference to the world's collective emissions. Literally, if everyone was to stop breathing in Europe, it would make basically no real difference to the path that we are on, if we are to believe that it is the end of the world is nigh type stuff. Okay? So he wrote, actually, in this note of the day, that we should measure success by our impact on human welfare more than our impact on global temperature. Well, there we are. And of course, he's all lined up with technologies that take old nuclear waste and convert that into energy, isn't he? A bit like Dennis Bushnell was talking about. Yeah. Call me a cynic. He notes that with climate change, whilst it poses serious risks, especially to the poor, it will not lead to humanity's demise. And he's saying that it is not the top threat compared to poverty and disease. I'm actually, Bill, if you're listening, if you just happen to be passing through the interwebs and looking on your YouTubes and you come across this video and it's talking about you, you know, you do a search on your name and it comes up with this video, right? I think the biggest threat is not those things per se. I've made a point very many times that, you know, there are humans living in Arizona and there's humans living in the Arctic. Thank you very much, Odd1X. Very, very appreciated for that 20 Canadian dollars. So there are people living in extremes of climate all over the world. A few degrees here and there. I don't think it's going to really change things. Of course, animals can't migrate or engineer their environment in the same way that humans can. So I think they're going to be the big losers. But I think this. I think that there is, yes, there's risks to the poor with disease. There is risk to the poor with poverty. Yes, okay. We can have questions about what is the right solutions to those. But a lot of disease comes from environmental factors, and a lot of things that are actually causing long-term harms are chemicals that are somehow getting into our body, Bill. Chemicals that are somehow getting into our body. And one of those types of chemicals are forever chemicals that are in the environment. Thank you, Beninator. Really very, very kind of you for that $10 there. Yeah, so it's the chemicals that are in the environment, these, you know, forever chemicals, as I was saying. And it comes down to pollution. It is a truism, one might say, that in many of the manufacturing places in the world, both in the past and in the present, people have turned a blind eye to pollution. I've seen these old pictures of factories in the Czech Republic where it was basically like an apocalyptic area around the factories, for instance, up in Ostrava. And it was noted how absurdly polluted the environment was, these toxic wastelands. And the reason you get that kind of pollution is because it takes a lot of energy to process the waste that comes out of industry. Now, everyone's very happy with their cheap goods and their nice trinkets, but somewhere they are produced and the materials to make them are mined. Okay? And in that process, in the mining and the processing, animal habitats and the quality of water, the quality of the soil that grows food and stuff is damaged. And in the process of generating the energy for those kind of things, both getting the resources or flooding the land or whatever, or putting up wind turbines or covering places with solar panels, a large swathes of land are denuded to produce the energy, regardless of what type it is. In fact, there's a large argument to say, you know, whilst nuclear has its risks, it is very dense in terms of the amount of production it can do for the area of land mass that it needs to cover. And so, you know, that leaves a lot of land for other things to do other things. I think pollution is probably, Bill, with all due respect, one of the most important uses of energy. Not AI, not AI. AI is going to transfer wealth from the many and into the hands of the few. The investors in those companies and the main sponsors and individuals involved in those companies. Why can't we get the same level of determination to create clean environments? It might be a few degrees hotter. You know, you might be able to grow your grapes where you couldn't grow grapes before. But to produce cleaner environments for people, for animals, for other parts of the biosphere. If you were producing clean, let's say, nuclear energy, and you were dealing with the fuel cycle properly, then you wouldn't need to necessarily flood large swathes of rainforest. Okay, so in this aim to go from this so-called global boiling narrative, where the end of the world is nigh, and if you don't hand us all the tax you can possibly give us for everything that you're doing, then we will not be able to decide where we need to spend that money and who needs to benefit from it in order to save this apocalypse that is occurring. Because the temperatures are rising. No! What we're now looking at is, we can't use a gas stove. We can't use a hydrocarbon powered car. You can't do any of those things because end of the world is nigh. However, it's perfectly acceptable for us to install loads and loads and loads, in fact, many thousands of megawatts of power to power a data center using gas turbines, using vast swathes of gas. Millions and millions and millions and millions of cooked meals worth of gas per day sucked up and burnt in order to power a neo-utopia where everyone is sucked to their screens and your every thought is managed so that they can create a cyber peace. A cyber peace. Yes. This is what they're willing to break all of the rules to create. I quite like this image here. It looks a little bit like the nightmarish line that is being produced in Saudi Arabia, or rather, I think 3 sections of it. A little itty bitty bit. Yeah. There could be a positive outcome that loads and loads of new generating capacity are put in, and particularly clean energy in the form of fusion. I mean, this would be my ideal scenario. They literally deliver the goods on fusion technologies with several competing technologies, and AI is a complete monumental dud. So out of it, we get clean energy to clean up the environment, yes, which actually is, in my view, leading to disease and leading to poverty. Because if you can't get land that's arable to grow your food, and you can't get water that's not polluted to grow your fish and to, farm, then you get poor. Because the most important thing you need is stuff in your gob, and stuff that's water and nutrition, but a high value. You don't get that, and no one can fight a disease, Mr. Bill Gates. And that comes down to solving the kind of blind eye attitude that is given to pollution in places where material and products are extracted and produced respectively. So with that, I am going to one last little video here on the news. It's not really news, it was news to me. Someone sent me something. If it was you, let me know, because I did try and find the email who sent it. But it's very interesting to me. And then we're going to show a a recording where I've done this kind of rough AI translation. There we go. It was useful for that. Although not that useful when you hear the changing accents, but it was a real struggle sometimes. But anyway, and I did some translation of, assisted translation of the words, which are pretty accurate, and I think you'll be able to understand it. And this extra little bit I have here for you is this little slide. I don't even know where the slide came from. I probably would if I could find it. But apparently it's from a guy called Dr. Donald Richter. And it was written in the early 1950s. Yes, this is the 1950s, from when the technology in the ball lightning study by Eric Davis under space, it was classified under space and aerospace, was hidden from the ball lightning study by Eric Davis because of this classification under space and aerospace. I believe it was in the 1950s, as part of the nuclear program, that they understand there's something fundamental that you can hack into about how the universe works. And here is a scientist, Dr. Ronald Richter, who wrote this particular phrase here. But I've actually got the real quote. And apparently it was came out, this thinking of his came out likely as part of his work on the Hummel project, which was apparently a controversial Argentine nuclear fusion research initiative funded by President Juan Perón. Don't cry for me, Argentina. The truth is I never left you. Yeah, well. It was later referenced in a declassified US intelligence report in 1999, and it analysed Richter's post-war activities and concepts. Apparently, the full quote was preserved in these US intelligence reports, including his English translation of Richter's German originals. And apparently Joseph P. Farrell referred to this as in his book on Nazi post-war plan to control finance, conflict, physics and space, which was published apparently in 2008. Anyway, the full quote, which again was written by Dr. Ronald Richter in the early 1950s, was, "We assume that highly compressed electron gas (brackets plasma) becomes a detector for energy exchange with what we call zero-point energy. On the basis of exchange coupling, it seems to be possible to extract a compression proportional amount of zero-point energy by means of a magnetic field-controlled exchange fluctuation between the compressed electron gas and a sort of cell structure in space representing what we call zero-point energy." Well, if that sounds like gobbledygook, maybe you haven't been paying attention. When I read that, it sounds quite a lot like what we have actually been observing. It also sounds like something that would not sound out of place for someone that had watched my ICCF 26 poster presentation in Morioka this last May. I am saying that electrons, through an electrodynamic process, but specifically a fractal magnetohydrodynamic process, produce at the fractal toroidal moment core and subcores a structure which is able to effectively clutch to and engage with the ether and extract zero-point energy. That is to say, the thing over which light travels is moved into this phase singularity such that it drags the reference material, the jelly-like material, over which photons normally travel. And if all of the photons are traveling over various quanta of this material and it's getting pulled into that phase singularity, it gets dragged in along with it, and therefore it captures all of the zero-point energy up to the ability of the magnetic field structure. And so let's go back to that. He says that we assume that highly compressed electron gas plasma, so it's like the concepts I was talking about with the NASA scientists becomes a detector for energy exchange with what we call zero-point energy. This is in the early 1950s, people. This isn't last week. This isn't the 1980s, right? On the basis of exchange coupling, it seems to be possible to extract a compression proportional amount. Now, what is the proportional? Is the proportion a multiplier, or is it an exponent? Amount of zero-point energy by means of magnetic field controlled exchange fluctuation between the compressed electron gas and a sort of cell structure in space representing what we call zero-point energy. So who was this chap? His full name, he was born in Austria, born Ronald Richter, and he was a physicist, from an Austrian physicist. He studied experimental physics at the German University of Prague, no less, earning his PhD under Professor Ferdinand Rausch von Traubenberg. During World War II, he worked in Nazi Germany in their chemical and aerospace industries. At AEG, for those of you who've got a washing machine, in Berlin, researching high-energy arc discharges. High-energy arc discharges. How very curious. Okay. He also researched, get this, shockwave plasmas. So high-energy arc discharges and shockwave plasmas. Are we bringing everything in the last several weeks together? And potential fusion reactions involving light nuclei like lithium and deuterium. Post-war, he fled to Argentina, where Perón recruited him in 1948 to lead secret advanced physics projects. What he is famous for is that he directed this Huemul project between 1949 and 1952 on Huemul Island near Bariloche in Argentina, and it was the world's first publicly announced attempt at controlled thermonuclear fusion, using a novel inertial confinement, no less, method with exploding plasmas and magnetic fields. Exploding plasmas and magnetic fields. What do we have in that device that we were looking at by Klimov? We are having literally an exploding plasma being pinched in a magnetic field. He claimed breakthroughs in cold fusion. He claimed breakthroughs in cold fusion between 1949 and 1952. I don't know. It's too much. And unlimited energy, but the project collapsed in scandal. Of course it would. In 1952, after independent audits found no fusion occurred, leading to fraud accusations. Perón's embarrassment and Richter's brief imprisonment. Despite Perón's embarrassment and brief imprisonment, sounds like they might have actually found something and they were covering it up. Well, apparently, because of this and his apparent failure, there's been lots of sort of conspiracy theories that have been banded about this, about Nazi technologies and zero-point energy harvesting, and a lot of the people credit him as being something to do with the UFO and anti-gravity research. All those terrible ideas. Can't be possibly thinking of those. Alleged to die Glock. Okay? And then he, after in his later life, he actually consulted on energy projects in West Germany until he died. So, he worked on the first publicly announced thermonuclear fusion project to make actual fusion energy. And his words were, we assume, this was in the early 1950s, one could assume that this was somewhere either when he was actually doing the research or shortly afterwards, that highly compressed electron gas plasma becomes a detector for energy exchange with what we call the zero-point energy. On the basis of exchange coupling, it seems to be possible to extract a compression proportional amount of zero-point energy by means of magnetic field controlled exchange fluctuation between the compressed electron gas and a sort of cell structure in space representing what we call zero-point energy. A cell structure. Very, very interesting. What do cells look like? What do cells look like? Okay. All right. And with that, I'm going to introduce you to tonight's video, which we will discuss at the end. And this is on the influence of accelerated body rotation on other bodies, light and gravity. And this is by V.A. Chizov and I.N. Stepanov. I'm going to let him speak for himself. Now, don't laugh because the voice changes several times. It's a function of 11 Labs losing its way. It's difficult to translate long segments, and you often have to take out chunks, and it all costs money, and it takes time to try and get it to work. Anyway, I think it's all there. I have painstakingly gone through and listened and tried to get the full sense of it there. I haven't been able to translate all the slides. I've done about a third of them, but I will do a full video in the future where all of those will be on the one video. But today I'm going to show you something because I think it's incredibly profound, and then we're going to discuss it afterwards. You'll have to let me know if you can hear his audio. I think it is a little bit under level, and I don't know if I can fix that here, but you might just have to turn the volume up on your speaker. So let me know. I'm about to play it now. Thank you. I will see you on the other side.
The influence of accelerated body rotation on other bodies and light, as well as on gravity. I would like to note that all the work presented was done in collaboration with Igor Stepanov and Vladimir Chizov myself. During the extensive discussion of experiments with consultations and opposition from Zatelepin and Samsonenko, in October 2024, last year, we made a brief report on experiments with torsindas at the 28th conference, ball lightning and cold nuclear fusion. These experiments have been of interest not only to us as the performers for 6 years now, but have also sparked lively interest among the scientific audience of this seminar. This includes Klimov, Zatelepin, Bychkov's seminar, Bolozhenkov, Otlovoy. According to the experimental work conducted with torsins, to attempt to explain the effect of accelerated rotation of one body on another body, and this is a sensitive torsion sensor. We proposed a hypothesis that differs from existing theoretical concepts. The essence of the hypothesis is that any material body exists because any substantial body exists due to the consumption of ether. This leads to the emergence of a gradient of the ether medium at the surface layer. This hypothesis about the influence of accelerated rotation of a body on the ether gradient at its surface affect the ether of a closed volume where sensors are located, causing them to move. This is a torsin, a laser beam, a liquid in a capillary. The proposed hypothesis caused distrust among many. To confirm or refute our hypothesis, additional experiments were conducted this year. About the previous and new experiments, today there will be a not brief but an extended report. Our new experiment this year on the effect of accelerated rotation of a body on laser light. To confirm or refute our hypothesis on the emergence of the gradient of the etheric medium at the surface of any body, experiments with a laser beam were conducted. A low-power laser beam of 5 milliwatts, red, at an angle, a small angle, was reflected from a mirror, and a rapidly rotating disc was brought 5 to 15 millimeters from the beam, with the speed increasing from 4 to 11,000 revolutions per minute in 3 to 4 seconds. That is, in 3 to 4 seconds, it would accelerate from 4,000 to 11,000 revolutions. 11,000. Imagine the acceleration there. With 70 repetitions of the action at such acceleration of the disc parallel to the beam, the reflected beam shifted from its original position. It should be noticed that the rotating disc was hermetically sealed. This is Zatelepin's remark after the first discussion of the conducted experiment, which was carried out. So when the disc was positioned perpendicular to the beam, if I placed the disc perpendicular to the beam, this effect was absent. And here is the experiment setup. So first, there is the laser itself, the mirror, and the rotating disk. The rotation was both clockwise and counterclockwise, but more on that a bit later. It seems surprising that the beam deviated from the central position in two ways. With accelerated clockwise rotation, the laser beam was repelled from the area of the rapidly rotating disk. When the disk rotated counterclockwise, the laser beam was attracted to this area, as shown in the diagram. If we rotate clockwise, the beam deflects in this direction, and if in the opposite direction, counterclockwise, it deflects the other way. So what does deviation mean, so to speak? Number one is the laser. The rotating disk was positioned parallel to the beam at a distance of 5 to 15 millimeters. The rapidly rotating disk was hermetically sealed.
I will show the photographs later.
And if we rotate clockwise, the beam seems to be repelled, and the mirror, this mirror is placed so that the beam is long, 90 meters in this case. Here, 45 meters and another 45 meters. A 90-meter beam is what we are considering in this case. And if we rotate counterclockwise, the beam seemed to be attracted and deflected in the other direction. That is, the effect of the rapidly rotating disk turned out to be significant. But I will later explain further how this experiment came about and why it was conducted. But it turned out quite successful. This indicates such deviations, plus minus. This speaks of a change in the density of the medium in the area of the rapidly rotating body, which leads to a change in the refractive index. Only the refractive index can cause deviation along the beam. We all know if you put a pencil in water, there will be a completely different effect. The speed of light is different. Once again, let's note that the disk of accelerated rotation was hermetically sealed. Experiments were conducted on 30-meter beams indoors and on 90-meter beams in the open air. At night, in the absence of wind. So here are the results of the experiment. With this acceleration of the disk and its mass of 35 grams, the deviation from the center of the spot on the 30-meter beam was about plus or minus 1.5 centimeters. This was clearly visible. The observations are very precise there. And the ratio of this 1.5 meter beam to 30 meters gave a coefficient of 510 to the negative fourth. And the second experiments on 90-meter beams, that is, there were 45 meters and 45 meters. The beam was 90 meters long. And at 90, practically the same. The deviation was 5-6 centimeters. So here, the deviation was stronger, but the coefficient turned out to be about the same, 6.7 times 10 to the negative 4. This deviation of plus or minus 5 centimeters, this deviation, if it is about 5 to 6 centimeters on a 90-meter beam, when rotating clockwise, it's one deviation, counterclockwise in the opposite direction, another deviation. 6 centimeters, I divided by 90 meters and got a coefficient of 6.7 times 10 to the power of minus 4. And in an enclosed space on a 30-meter beam, plus or minus 1.5 centimeters, I divided by 30 meters the length of this beam and got 5 times 10 to the power of minus 4. Well, approximately the same value. Well, and here, this photograph, a beam of about 30 meters. That is, they assembled several mirrors like this. It was a very complex task, so to speak, to fix the mirrors so that they, so to speak, did not diverge and hit each other. And the sum of these beams is the laser. And this, so to speak, is the room that my family calls Dad's cell, where I conduct experiments. There's a TV here. and you can relax. Also, the refrigerator is nearby. Here, these beams made a length of 30 meters, reflecting off each other. That is, there were several mirrors here, and this is a 90-meter beam. This is outside. And of course, it was conducted at night because the contrast here is very low. Here is the laser itself. It was a good support, a very powerful support. A mirror was attached to it, and by turning, so to speak, changing the angle, it was directed to the door. And the distance was about 90 meters. That is 45 meters and 47 meters and 45 meters, about 90 meters. This is the sealing made simple but very effective to prevent any convection from the disk affecting the beam. The obtained results confirm our hypothesis about the existence of an ether gradient on the surface of the body and the influence of rotational momentum on it. Well, I will return to this experiment. It is very interesting. And why did it even arise? Where did it come from? A bit later. But here are the experiments with torsindas, which have already been reported, and new experiments. But there, everything was briefly reported. And here, in general, an extended report has been prepared. What does the experiment setup look like? Well, it is a glass flask hermetically sealed where a torsind was installed, suspended on a very thin thread or spider web. There are these special threads, but with the thread it was difficult, to get such a very strong thread again. Therefore, mainly silk thread with a diameter of 15 to 20 microns was used. That is, if a hair is about 70 to 80 microns, imagine that. And an accelerated rotating disc or a spinning gyroscope with accelerated rotation. I was brought close to it. And with accelerated clockwise rotation, the disc began to move like a gear counterclockwise. And vice versa, if we rotated counterclockwise, it worked like a gear clockwise. But there was no contact. Experiments were conducted on aluminum and on mica and on paper. Paper torsins were also used. Well, this is a photograph of the experiment. If you need to watch the video recording, it is available. In general, you can watch it, although I have already shown it. The diagram of another experiment. The gyroscope was placed at the bottom. Here it begins to spin rapidly clockwise, and the torsion starts also slowly, but also rotate clockwise. Here they kind of worked in parallel. Well, of course, there's a very big difference in the rate of change. So, well, this is, so to speak, a photograph of the experiment. So this is our gyroscope, which in general protected from vibration. An aviation gyroscope from a Heinkel airplane of the year 1942. So, and which in 3.5 minutes reaches 40,000 revolutions. Here is such a scheme. And this is our torsend, which in this case is made of aluminum. This is a flask hermetically sealed, and here it is suspended on a cobweb or a silk thread. Now about the sensitivity of the torsions. Testing the sensitivity of the torsions. Aluminum, its thickness is about 14 microns, diameter 80 millimeters, weight no more than 0.4 grams, suspended on a cobweb or silk thread, as well as mica of the same size and paper of the same size. First, the magnetic field of 2,800 microteslas does not affect any torsend. However, the second, the electrostatic field, has a significant impact on all torsends, including aluminum, mica, and paper, and it was necessary in general to come up with an entire scheme to eliminate the influence of electrostatics. Third, the light flux 360 lumens. This was a white semiconductor flashlight, affects all torsends, but the strongest effect is on the aluminum torsen. Well, obviously, transparency and reflection. Everything influences. And so an assessment was made of the transmission coefficient of the effect during accelerated rotation of the gyroscope on an H-shaped torcent made of aluminum and a U-shaped torcent made of mica. Well, U-shaped because the weight had to be maintained, which were suspended on very thin synthetic material, 15 to 20 microns. The aluminum torcent 0.36 grams at a distance from the center of the suspension. The torcent was about 10 to 12 centimeters. And so the gamma coefficient is the ratio of the torque moment of the torsion bar from the action of the gyroscope, which it received in 2 minutes, to the gyroscope, which in 2 minutes developed 10 to the power of minus 4, resulting in a coefficient of 10 to the power of minus 5. But I mentioned last year that, honestly, I was surprised by such a large coefficient. I expected a much smaller coefficient. Well, that's what it turned out to be. The moment of force of the torsion that resulted from the action of the gyroscope. And this value, I can even show it now. So, we have 2 minutes, right? 120 seconds this works. And it deviated by 1 radian in 120 seconds, which is 60 degrees, approximately 60 degrees. From this, we can calculate the acceleration with which it received such acceleration, 1 radian in 120 seconds. And we know its mass. The mass is equal to mr squared. This is the moment of inertia, right? But we know the mass of the gyroscope itself, and we know the radius. So, and from here, it turns out it is calculated, right? Actually, I just wanted to show. You can even do a check. This is 120 seconds. This is exactly, this is for the gyroscope calculation. 30,000 it reached in these 2 minutes. It got an acceleration of 25 radians per second squared. Well, its mass is about 50 grams. Yes, here it is, the mass. The mass of the gyroscope is about 50 grams. This is the effective one that creates this rotation. Here, the radius is also known, the time is known, the revolutions are known. From this, so to speak, we calculate 10 to the power of minus 4 Newton meters. That's the torque created here. And the torsion in this case creates about 1 radian in 120 minutes, fully unwinding. And here it turns out, so to speak, its mass is 0.36 grams. The radius, since its diameter is 80 millimeters, means its radius is 4 centimeters. So, and then we get 10 to the power of minus 5 of these ratios. An assessment of the transmission coefficient was made. So I just say, accelerated rotation of the disk on an H-shaped torsion, about 10 to 12 centimeters. That is, if from the ampule, then it's about 3 centimeters. Yes, here it is shown, I'm circling it. The flask where the torsion is located. This distance is about 10 to 12 centimeters from the center of the torsion. Well, the center needs to be maintained here. And here is a new experiment by Tarsin with the evacuation of atmospheric pressure. These are the new experiments of this year. They were not previously reported and not studied. Vacuum 10 to the power of minus 3. From 705, well, as we are used to in millimeters of mercury, not in pascals, let's do it that way. From 750 millimeters of mercury to 16 microns. This is the kind of pump that was used. These are its characteristics. But for now, let's examine in more detail. With the pressure of 1 atmosphere, it will be useful to us. 750 millimeters of mercury, gyroscope clockwise, but this is conditional. It can also be counterclockwise. The same effect, only the angle of deviation will be in the opposite direction. And we got an angle of 60 degrees in 120 seconds. In 2 minutes, we got a moment of force like this formed at torsion. And the gyroscope developed this magnitude, 10 to the power of negative 4 Newton per meter. And this ratio gave us this 10 to the power of negative 5. What somewhat confused me back then. Let's highlight the volume located here at Tarsin. The volume of this atmosphere. Let's take 7 by 4, that's 28, n by 2. Well, about 58 cubic centimeters, such a volume. And 1 cubic centimeter at a normal pressure, that is under normal conditions, which is a pressure of 1 atmosphere, a temperature of about 20 degrees, contains 1 times 10 to the 19th atoms of air. These are, so to speak, well-known things. So if we multiply 1 times 10 to the 19th by this volume, we will get about 6 times 10 to the 20th atoms here. This will be useful for us later. And here I would like to talk about the phantom. Here, an attempt to abruptly change the direction of a rapidly rotating body near the torsion flask did not result in a change in the movement of the torsion. That is, if I spin a disc or gyroscope and turn it in the opposite direction, it begins to spin in the opposite direction, and the torsion does not feel it. The time delay was about 5 minutes, which we perceived as a sort of phantom that creates and causes such a time delay. But we'll deal with the phantom a bit later. Now the vacuum schemes. So such a 4 vacuum pump 10 to the power of -3 was used, which I created. 1.5 liter flask was acquired, and the lid was made special, a lid made with vacuum rubber and with vacuum grease. Vacuum grease was used. Moreover, the guys gave me very good grease, imported grease. Here, well, this is a valve, a vacuum valve, and this is a filling valve. If we needed to pump it out, we opened it and air would enter. Otherwise, it just wouldn't open. This is the kind of setup that was made. And here is the vacuum 10 to the -3. 16 microns, millimeters, microns of mercury. And here is the angle of deviation. Even the gyroscope time was slightly increased. The gyroscope moment is 10 to the -3, about 10 to the -3. Well, there, 5, 10 to the -3. Here, the deviation was only 12, not 60 degrees, but 12 degrees, which is 0.2 radians. Well, here all the accelerations are calculated in radians, so it can't be done any other way. And what does this result in? As a result, the calculations showed that the torque of Tarsind has now become 10 to the power of -11. And this ratio of 10 to the power of -11 to the ratio, to the moment of force. So this ratio of the Tarsind force moment to the gyroscope has already become 10 to the power of -8. But this is more realistic, what I expected in the first case. But here the question arises, is it not the residual atmosphere that starts to sway it again? And for this, it was done. Let's go back to this moment. Here we have 6, 10, 20th, and if we find out how much per 1 atom of air the moment of force is, it's about 10 to the power of -29th. And if we multiply by 10 to the 16th, this, well, about 10 to the -14th, we will get the moment of atoms of this entire area we considered as if it operates 10 to the -14th. And in this case, the ratio turns out to be 10 to the power of -11. That is, the atmosphere is 10 to the power of -11. So 3 orders are missing here, 3 orders. That is, this atmosphere can no longer move Tarsind, and something else is acting, because this coefficient turned out to be 3 orders of magnitude higher than the system, the vacuum, the residual vacuum atmosphere. This is very important. Well, here I want to talk about the disappearance of the phantom effect. People always talk a lot about phantom. Experiments conducted in a vacuum atmosphere showed that the imaginary phantom was caused by the action of an external, rapidly rotating body on the enclosed atmosphere, on the air. That is, we spun the air, and it gave us such an effect, which led to a time delay perceived by us as a phantom. In a vacuum atmosphere, the phantom or delay in action on tar synth is completely absent. That is, you flip it, and it starts working in the other direction. There is no phantom.
Claudia, may I interrupt you at this moment? Since I talked to you a lot about this topic, I somehow understand it better. Just so our audience understands, you introduced the term phantom. Can you clearly and briefly explain what you mean by phantom?
Here's the delay, so to speak, in changing the reverse rotation of the torsion. That is, I showed that when turned clockwise, it works like a gear.
Volodya, that's not it. So please remember earlier, at the very beginning, a few years ago, a phantom is when nothing is spinning anymore, nothing is affecting anything, and this thing keeps spinning. What did you call a phantom back then? Please, you remove this rotating outer body, and the torsion continues to spin, which you call the phantom.
Yes, it continues to spin. That is, in this case, we spun the air around our torsion. And this is not a phantom. It's all explainable. We spun the air, and until the air stops, we cannot engage the reverse. This is what we call the phantom. There is no phantom at all. If we can't explain it, we call it something unimaginable, a phantom. But when all this was pumped out and the residual atmosphere no longer affects it, only something that rotates rapidly influences it. And we will now deal with this. There is no phantom.
You mean to say that this thing which spins your torsion in a vacuum or almost without air kind of has no or almost no inertia and changes its direction of rotation very quickly? Yes, exactly. Depending on the direction of rotation of this gyroscope.
Yes, of an accelerated spinning gyroscope.
So this environment has very low inertia.
Yes. Just as there is probably no phantomas, there is no phantom either. It's just a misunderstanding. It's our invention with these phantoms. This is the conclusion I make. How to explain exactly this effect on the accelerated action of the disk? Experiments have been conducted, similar to the ancient experiments of Henry Cavendish in the year 1798, to determine the gravitational constant, but in a different interpretation. This is rotation, and not just rotation, but accelerated rotation of a volumetric disk. It should be noted that Zatelepin and Baranov, as early as the 18th year, paid attention to the addition in the formula of universal gravitation. Accelerated rotation of a body, report at the seminar. I heard and listened to him myself at the physics department of Moscow State University. And I was even surprised then that Valery Nikolaevich reached Newton. I had a bit of a smile, but that smile then turned into real work. Well, in the Icarus collection and at the 25th conference, these reports, they are there, they're reports. Well, here's a hypothesis, an attempt to explain the experiment with Tarsid as gravitational actions. With this slide, we immediately want to note that we are not Einsteins. This is Chizhov and Stepanov, but that's not the point. We are making an attempt to explain the artifact. Very interesting, unusual experimental results obtained from very sensitive Tarsin sensors. The results of these experiments make one ponder the validity of general relativity. What is gravity? This question has been before scientists since time immemorial. Isaac Newton provided a brilliant formula for the interaction of two masses. Newton's law, of course, is beyond doubt. But why the center of mass? This question currently remains misunderstood. Many scientists, both past and present, have addressed this problem. The generally accepted theory of gravity today is Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity. Creating his theory, he rejected the medium that was anciently called ether Then the question arises, what is a field or space according to Einstein? If a certain substance which was anciently called ether is removed, then the answer according to Einstein becomes obvious. It is a field of nothing. This field is space, it is nothing, and this nothing he geometrically represents as shown in the figure. But how can a field of nothing explain the interaction of two bodies through nothing? What causes or why does a massive body lead to the distortion of space, and why? Because it is necessary to explain why bodies attract each other, and gravity needs to be explained, but that's redundant. Yes, mathematics shows that mathematics exists, but is it really so? And the mathematics of quantum mechanics and the comparison with Newtonian mathematics gives a difference of 122 orders. So this cosmological constant does not match by 122 orders. So there are many questions here. What led to the rejection of the ethers? These are the Michelson-Morley experiments, we all know. But is it really so? Well, here's 81.0. And in 1887, they already measured 6.64 kilometers per second. And the speed of Earth's rotation is 30 kilometers per second. Therefore, it was concluded that apparently not ether. Well, in the year 1928, Sergei Ivanovich Vavilov, not the geneticist Vavilov, but the physicist Vavilov, showed that shifts in interference fringes depending on the gravity of the instrument do exist. And here is his picture. And all those small shifts were detected. Physicists repeatedly tried to verify the obtained results. 1921 to 26. Dayton Miller conducted new experiments, this time placing the instrument at an altitude of 1,860 meters at the Mount Wilson Observatory. Received a value of 8 to 10 kilometers per second based on interference divisions. Such results personally alarmed Einstein, who demanded that Miller's experiments be checked. Well, later they said that there were errors, something with the temperature, although his experiment was completely stable in terms of temperature. But anyway, as for Miller himself, he expected a speed 40 times higher than what he measured and turned to theorists, but he never got an answer from anyone. But in 1968, 1971, in Obninsk, Demyanov conducted a series of experiments to detect the ether wind. As a light medium, he used gas, hydrogen sulfide, air. Well, the arm here is different. 6 meters, 1 atmosphere, 2 atmospheres. With air, the arm is 6 meters. With water, the arm is 30 centimeters. With fused quartz, 10 centimeters. And other materials. Shifts of interference fringes were obtained and interpreted as a manifestation of the ether wind with a speed of 225 to 625 kilometers per second at the measurement point. Well, if he aimed, so to speak, at some other stars, he would get different speeds. Matters were classified. Demyanov was expelled completely from Obninsk, but now it's no longer a secret. He publishes it quite freely. And here are the results of the experiments of Miller and Demyanov. If Miller measured 10 there and 5, let's say, then according to Demyanov, it turns out to be about 330, and so on. And how does Demyanov explain why such results were underestimated? The fact is that interferometers of this type should produce parasitic light beams, creating a more intense and contrasting interference pattern than the useful beams. But one could doubt Demyanov's results, which he can now publish and is already publishing. The secrecy has been lifted. The Australian physicist Cahill, independently of Demyanov, concluded in 2002 that the anisotropy of the speed of light can only be detected in air or another transparent medium, a light medium. Taking these corrections into account, Morley actually caught the ether wind at a speed of 208 kilometers per second, not 6 kilometers per second.
Volodya, can I stop you for a moment? I was just distracted by a call. Please clarify, if I understand correctly, that you are suggesting that Michelson and Morley worked in an air environment, and with your previous experiments, you showed that this is a very important.
Yes, yes, of course, about that and about this as well.
That is, if you want to measure the ether wind, it's better to get rid of the air because the air interferes.
Yes, of course, of course.
Thank you. Please continue.
And here's a very popular phrase from the internet. Any scientific theory, literally including the theory of relativity, must be subjected to criticism. If this theory turns into holy scripture, it will lead to stagnation and other serious consequences. I really like this phrase.
I inserted it. And what did Dmitry Ivanovich Mendeleev say about ether? Dmitry Ivanovich Mendeleev repeatedly said and wrote in his works, without understanding ether as a universal medium that allows inertia over a distance, energy over a distance, the problems of gravitational energy cannot be considered solved. Ignoring it or unwillingness to study it leads to false conclusions.
And here is his first table. We all already know it. It started with the zero group, and Newton and Curran were at the forefront, and only then was hydrogen placed. This suggests that in general, not everything is clear to us. Well, then all of this was excluded. So why does the center of mass work with Newton's formulas? But the center of mass is a point in the center of a massive body. But this point of the center of mass does not exist in nature. In nature, the minimum we can descend to today, immerse ourselves in the center of any body, is a planet, a satellite, a piece of clay, and so on. This is up to the atom and elementary, well, quasi, let's leave quarks alone. This is protons, neutrons, and electrons, which have mass, charge, and magnetic properties. So, why does the center of mass work with Newton's formulas? The universe is a substance with ether. Numerous thought experiments include direct extension and repulsion according to Descartes, tachyon exchange according to Laplace, mass wave interaction according to Heaviside, space distortion according to Einstein, and so on. Regarding how gravity works through the interaction of bodies, it leads to the following views on this gravitational process through the interaction of bodies or their masses. The body has a constant mass. What contributes to this is gold or other, so to speak, things, millions of years of gold. And what are all substances made of, without considering quark theory, of protons and electrons, which have both charges and spins, and most importantly, in this consideration, precisely established different masses. The mass of a proton is almost 2,000 times greater than the mass of an electron, and the Coulomb charges are equal. A body charged with a negative charge by electrons will differ in mass only by the mass of the excess electrons. This is a negligible addition to the mass of the body, and the charges on the capacitor plate increase by tens or even hundreds of orders of magnitude. Therefore, mass compared to charge is something different. The current theory on elementary particles emphasizes their vortex-stable formation, but any vortex structure requires energy support. That is, a vortex must eventually come to an end. Or should we consider elementary particles, electrons, and protons as perpetual motion machines? Well, let's assume that to maintain their properties, we only consider masses and leave charges aside, since it was previously shown that they have a secondary effect. These elementary particles absorb, draw, or replenish something, replenishing their energy from the ether and substances of the universe, which ensures the infinite stability of their masses and their properties over time. Thus, the paradox of their perpetual motion is resolved. Let's accept the above as true. Mass plus ether as a function of time creates the constant of mass. This assumption can be justified by the fact that it is impossible to cool a substance to absolute zero temperature. There always remains zero-dimensional oscillation, which may be related to the parameter of ether absorption to maintain the vortex structure of an elementary particle. These are electrons and protons, plus ether as a function of time. The introduction of this postulate seems justified. Thus, the paradox of a perpetual motion machine for elementary particles, which make up a body with a certain mass, is physically eliminated. And here is our hypothesis. We believe that a gradient diffusion layer of ether is created at the surface of the body, and the ether itself flows in, is absorbed into the body through its surface to energetically sustain the entire system. What is the body made of? Once again, we assume that a gradient diffusion layer of ether is created at the surface of the body, and the ether itself flows, is drawn into the body through its surface for the energetic maintenance of the entire system. What is the body made of? That is, of electrons, protons. It is this etheric diffusion gradient at the surface of the body that determines gravitational actions, gravity on the surface of the body. Wow, since there is an etheric gradient at the surface of the body, it means it also determines the gravitational effect.
Gravity on the surface of the body, near the surface, on the surface of the body.
And here is a diagram of the gravitational action of two different bodies of two different masses in the etheric representation. Here we have a body of large mass and its gradient is quite large. This is the zero level of ether. And here it changes. And a small body of small mass. The gradient to support all this mass is small. An interesting fact was discovered in our work. Let's examine Newton's gravitational formula in more detail. The Earth attracts any body, but the body also attracts the Earth. From Newton's formula, it follows that any body at its surface with radius r has its own value of gravitational acceleration. But no one will argue about this. They simply did not pay attention to it. Yes, these can be very small values for g, but they exist. From this, it follows that adjustments need to be made to the perception of the universe. Correction to Galileo's experiment, for example, a metal sphere weighing 1 ton falling from a height of 100 meters has an increase in g. Here, g is 9.8 for us. And from 100 meters, this addition, considering this correction, will be 10 to the power of negative 2, 6.7, 10 to the power of negative 12 meters per second squared, and a body of 1 gram will have a correction of 10 to the power of negative 18. I cannot imagine who and how could record such a thing. And if you introduce the radius of a small body, then there is nothing to talk about. Of course, with such additions of g, these bodies will fall to the earth practically indistinguishably, simultaneously, but with a tiny theoretical correction. Here emerges a correction to Galileo. A more massive body will reach the ground and hit it slightly faster than a body of lesser mass. This might happen at extended distances from the Earth's surface, but it should occur according to our hypothesis. We find that in inertial systems, whether the Earth is at rest or rotating uniformly. The acceleration of gravity for a given body is determined by the gradient of the ether at the surface of the body, and the force of gravity decreases as the square of the distance from the surface of the body. This is according to Newton. But if there is a body, the Earth and the person on it is given accelerated rotation, the entire stable system will be disrupted. And this is understandable, earthquakes and so on. And here is a very similar picture from this, but with the difference that instead of the distortion of the space-time characteristic of this Einstein's well, we are talking about ether inflow and the emergence of an ether gradient at the surface of the body to ensure the stability of a massive body. That is, we are talking about ether flow, not, so to speak, a space-time funnel. We are talking about the ether gradient, which is absorbed into the body to maintain the entire system. That's what we're talking about, that a massive body has a larger gradient, a small one has a smaller ether pull gradient. and naturally the gravitational attraction in this case is less. Here the gradient is large, and in this case the attraction will be much greater. But let's return to gravity and the torsion. It is the accelerated rotation of a large disk or gyroscope that facilitates the movement of the torsion. That is, whether the disk is accelerating or the gyroscope is spinning, this thing starts to work like a gear without contact. Well, how can it be explained that the accelerated rotation of a large disk affects an isolated torsion? We believe that this action changes the ether gradient at the surface of the accelerated rotating body, and this leads to an effect on the torsion, creating an additional force. In stationary mode, everything is, so to speak, linear. Everything works well. As soon as we start to rotate it rapidly and powerfully, this ether gradient also begins to change, and an additional force appears. Here is the diagram of the change in the state of the ether near the surface area of a body during accelerated rotation. The dotted lines represent the change in the gradient of the diffusive ether at the surface of the body, which is rotating acceleratedly, and consequently the gravitational attraction force. And the gravitational attraction force in this case should also change. Well, you can imagine it like this. A body with accelerated rotation is our stationary torsion, and this is a body with powerful acceleration. As soon as the powerful acceleration starts working, an additional gradient appears. If we take, so to speak, the etheric interaction, which acts already on the torsion. This is the vector of stationary gravity, a body without rotation. And this is the resulting vector acting on the torsion, and this is the vector of force E with a greater acceleration. From this position, the presence of an ether gradient at the surface of the body leads to an important conclusion. The refractive index will differ from the surrounding environment. The surrounding environment is clear. The bodies made their own environment there. But with accelerated rotation, this effect should increase. That is, the gradient must change and the effect will increase. As of today, astronomical lensing is explained by the general theory of relativity space-time funnel. Such a funnel forms, and therefore, so to speak, there is a deviation of the beam, and we see something quite different from what is actually happening in the big sky. And if there is an ether gradient at the surface of the body, then the refractive index of light will differ from the distance from the body, and the light ray will have a deviation precisely due to this gradient, not because of the space-time well. The ether medium at the body's surface acquires functional density, and it varies for different bodies, and with accelerated rotation, this function should intensify. In this case, the effect of the star's lensing is explained by the gradient of the ether at the surface due to the emergence of the refractive index function. Here is the refractive index as a function, as a gradient. Consequently, the speed of light will not be c. But these are all speculations. Can they be tested experimentally? That's where this, so to speak, experiment with the laser beam came from. It was this question that led to the experiment with a low-power laser beam. This year's experiment on the influence, well, as I already reported, of light on the laser beam. A low-power 5-watt red laser beam was reflected at a small angle with accelerated up to 11,000 revolutions in 3 to 4 seconds with 10-fold repetition of the acceleration action. It should be noted that the rotating disc was hermetically sealed. When the disc was positioned perpendicular to the beam, this effect was absent. That is, this action must be parallel. And it turned out to be surprising that the beam deviates from the central position in 2 ways. With accelerated clockwise rotation, it deviates from the area of action of the rapidly rotating disk, and with the opposite, counterclockwise, the laser beam is attracted to this area. This indicates a change in the density of the medium in the area of the rapidly rotating body, which leads to a change in the refractive index. Well, we have already discussed the scheme. I will not dwell on it. And the coefficients on the 30-meter beams and on the 90-meter beams turned out to be approximately the same.
Volodya, please stop. I want to inform the audience. Essentially, Chizov is explaining the light experiment for the second time. This is thanks to the fact that I asked him. In my opinion, this is a very important experiment. That's why I asked him to talk about it first. In my view, this is the highlight of his presentation. That's why it happened twice. Essentially, he was editing the slides at the last moment. So twice sorry. Volodya, please continue.
An attempt at an experiment to test the effect on a beam of light was made. Accelerated rotation of a disk on the light beam was successful. Accelerated rotation of the body affects the light beam. And here is a new experiment from the same year, proposed by theoretical physicist Igor Ivanovich Edmundovich Bolozhenkov. We all know him. He has spoken at this seminar with Valery Nikolaevich and Klimov multiple times. In May of this year, Bolozhenkov, based on our work, he proposed conducting an interesting experiment, the effect of an accelerated rotating body using our instruments on the movement of liquid in a capillary tube. According to his assumption, the liquid should move. And such experiments were conducted. The experiment was carried out using the communicating vessel scheme with a water level, 2 transparent plexiglass flasks measuring 30 by 30, and with a height of 270 milliliters and a transparent polyethylene hose. The inner diameter is 7 millimeters. The outer diameter is 8 millimeters. The flasks were filled with 72% alcohol, 120 milliliters, and a diffusion barrier made of cotton was placed in the center of the tube. Into one of the flasks was poured 0.5 milliliters of medical iodine solution, which created a saturated yellow color in this part of the vessel and tube. Here is the diagram of the experiment to determine the effect of accelerated body rotation on the movement of a solution in a transparent liquid. These are, so to speak, our communicating vessels filled with the alcohol and iodine solution was dripped here, creating a yellow color. Well, and an accelerated rotating disc or gyroscope was used in the experiment. Well, this is a photograph. All this was carried out in the home conditions of summer cottages. The effect of a rapidly rotating body counterclockwise on the iodine solution and alcohol in the tube of communicating vessels. In 4 minutes of gyroscope rotation with acceleration from 0 to 40,000 revolutions, this iodine solution moved 15 to 20 millimeters into the clear area of the alcohol. If we go counterclockwise, notice that it rotates counterclockwise. Let's take a look. The disc rotates counterclockwise, the disc rotates this way, and the fluid moves into the transparent area.
Well, clockwise, it turns out the water moves clockwise. Your solution?
Yes, and the water in the opposite direction, right? Like clockwise. There. And this kind of movement of 15 to 20 millimeters was observed, but with a blurred front, which is interesting. The front was blurred in the same.
Volodya, a question. There's a cotton ball in the middle, and it somehow penetrates through the cotton, and it goes into this area.
Yes. The solution is leaving, right? And it creates a slightly blurred front. I'll show it now. It goes with such a blurred front. And when rotating clockwise, it's like all the liquid compresses and the front becomes very smooth. So there's this reverse action and the front, well, this, at first it was counterclockwise. He moved away. Here's the front, then, well, the middle. He has already become more, so to speak, compact. And here is the end of the process. It is already, so to speak, practically a flat front. But for greater persuasiveness, experiments were conducted with clocks. So accelerated rotation of the disc. Well, this is the beginning of the process. This is how it was. Here, Then it goes counterclockwise. It's blurred, moved over here. And clockwise, it's already.
He is the front. Volodya, oh, wait. Pay close attention, otherwise we won't understand anything you're saying.
Sorry. He, and who is he?
Front, of course, front. Here, counterclockwise, you see it moved here, there, and it became kind of blurred. But clockwise, when it worked, it became almost even. But here it's more clearly visible, of course.
What are the clocks needed for here?
When is this? Based on this experiment, this is in fact the first experiment. I will say now, the accelerated rotation of the body showed an effect on the movement of liquid in the capillaries, which undoubtedly pleased the author of the experiment, Mulogenkov, and the first to evaluate this experiment, Samsonenko, just Samsonenko. Nikolai Vladimirovich was delighted. And of course us. So, but why? It was suggested to write an article and publish it in Chemistry of Life. Well, they were interested and negotiated with me about it for 20 days. I invited them to my experiment. They seemed to agree and disagree at the same time, but it seems unclear why this is happening, as it appears to be related to ether. So, and this whole thing went on for 20 days, and no one came, and the whole thing stalled. So, no article. And the article was very well edited. Even Nikolai Vladimirovich made some corrections there. He liked it. A very good article was written. Well, you see how the classical science is regarded as big and so to speak. Well, okay, let's continue. Very interesting information. Mikhail Vasilievich Lomonosov, en masse, particles of the medium strike the surfaces, the surface corpuscles of the body, compacting it, and they cut off and bounce off, which determines the density and mass of the body. That is, he acknowledged that particles of the medium strike the surface corpuscles of the body, compressing it and bounce off, which determines the density and mass of the body. Tesla claimed that he developed an alternative theory of gravity but never published it. According to him, gravity is the result of the interaction of ether with masses. Electromagnetic waves can affect gravity, and we all know about levitation in superconductivity.
Already as of today.
From what has been said, a question arises. If bodies absorb ether, then why does it not run out? In philosophical reflection, it should be noted that if we consume ether in a given place, it must be replenished from another place. This is the dialectic of the development of the universe, and dark matter in this case turns out to be not so dark. Precisely because the ether is constantly consumed to maintain the system of electrons, protons, atoms, objects, living tissue, planets, stars, galaxies, and so on, the universe must expand, replenishing with ether. A new cavitation effect, bubbles, or bubbles of the Big Bang, or small explosions that replenish the expended ether. The connection between the micro and macro world is intriguing. From our hypothesis, in the micro world, everything is quantized, meaning everything occurs in portions. Then, according to our hypothesis, the ether must also be replenish energy consumed in quanta. But let's imagine, for example, a piece of clay made of protons and electrons, their frequency and speed of quantization. We will get a continuous flow of ether absorption into the body through its surface. Apparently, this postulate can unify the macro and micro worlds. In the presented work, we attempted to explain experimentally observed phenomena, the movement of Tarsine during the accelerated rotation of a massive independent body, the lensing of fluid movement in a capillary tube. Apparently, they fit well into this paradigm, universe with ether.
to confirm or refute everything that has been reported. New experiments at a higher technical level with good funding are needed. Well, that could be the end, but I will allow myself to provide examples. If, for example, a rocket is launched without accelerated rotation, then it will fly along a Newtonian trajectory. But if we give it acceleration in its rotation, either clockwise or counterclockwise, both trajectories will undoubtedly change. This can also be applied to the accelerated rotation of plasma in ball lightning and to ball lightning. The thing is, as of today, it's generally not clear why it seemingly doesn't obey the laws of physics. That is, it can fly up, down, sideways, change direction, so to speak, you know what I mean. But since it is still made up of material, particles, well, let's consider it. If the accelerated rotation of the plasma is absent, then it will act as gravitational mass. That is, it will fall to the Earth's surface. But if there is a strong accelerated rotation of the mass in the plasma of ball lightning, and this vector m greatly exceeds g, then the total vector will be different, and it will fly in the direction indicated by the total vector. If the vector changes, then it will also change its direction. That is, depending on the accelerated rotation. Well, of course, plasma can also sense electromagnetic fields and all that. But in this case, we are just showing that if there is simply rotation, accelerated rotation in it, then it will change its movement. Conclusions. The experiments conducted on the effect of accelerated rotation of a body on the light flux of a low-power laser beam revealed this influence. There is an influence which confirmed the previously proposed hypothesis about the existence of a gradient of some medium on the surface of Terra, which was anciently called ether. The influence of accelerated rotation of a body on the light flow was established for the first time. That's the first point. Second, for the first time, the influence of accelerated rotation on the movement of liquid in a capillary has been established, which can be used for medical and other purposes. The idea for conducting the experiment was proposed by Bulozhenkov. So, third, from the presented work, it follows. By learning to control the diffusion layer in the area of the body's surface, this gradient of ether, it is possible to change the gravitational effect of this body on other bodies. Fourth, the presence and ability to change the gradient of the ether at the surface of the bodies allows explaining the levitation flight of an Indian yogi. A person, through the power of their will and energy, has learned to create conditions affecting the diffusion gradient of ether at the surface of their body on the ether, which enabled their flight above the ground as well as moving objects by human will. Look at how Kulaginas trains to move a box of matches or even a single match. How can one learn to effectively control this diffusion layer of ether? There is no effective answer yet. Could it be the accelerated rotation of powerful but small-sized magnets or superconducting magnets with great acceleration near the surface of the body? The question remains open, but accelerated rotation of the body affects gravity. Well, we consider it our pleasant duty to express sincere gratitude to Samsonenko, Zatelepin, and Bulozhenkov for their consultations, critical remarks, and discussions of the results obtained from this experimental work we conducted should be continued at a higher level. Thank you all for your attention.
Boom! Bada boom! Big bada boom! Okay, so I have the introduction, which I forgot to add on to the beginning of that, which I will play, because you need to understand who Chizov is. He is an incredible scientist from the Soviet Union. So I'm just going to set that up here in a second, and we will play that. Bid 2. And it's going to go black for you guys. Sorry about that. I'm going to add this. I'm going to keep talking in the background, and we'll just add the media source here. And I will just choose the sample here, the video. Excuse me, it's all black, but I am here. I am here. You do want to see this, and then we'll do some discussion on this. Okay.
Today is October 15th, 2025. Moscow time is 16 hours 2 minutes, 16 hours 2 minutes. I am Valery Zatelepin, and we are starting webinar number 3 of the autumn-winter session of 2025. Today, we have a report on the influence of accelerated body rotation on other bodies, light, and also on gravity. The speaker is candidate of technical sciences, laureate of the Council of Ministers of the USSR Prize, Vladimir Alexandrovich Chizhov. So, well, I've already, he has spoken several times, I've introduced this, but once again, I still find it appropriate to say that he is our one and only laureate of the State Prize of the Council of Ministers of the USSR. This characterizes him as an experimenter with vast experience. Therefore, I ask you to take his experimental results today seriously, not like how Sharonosov just told us some publications do. That's the first point. Second, I just want to remind you that this person, as he told me at least, I might have told you about this, but I want to inform you that he will learn to grow large silicon crystals, pure, defect-free, large silicon crystals, which help, which on the basis of which powerful lasers are made. In the Soviet Union, we didn't know how to do this before him. Therefore, this person is extremely distinguished. Today, he will talk about some of his experiments on this topic. This topic emerged about 7 or 8 years ago. Not this specific topic, but some background of this topic. I'll tell you what it's about. It emerged about 7 or 8 years ago in the Analyze laboratory, where Zatelepin and Baranov conducted experiments with rapidly rotating bodies. I emphasize, rapidly rotating. I am mentioning this now specifically to emphasize the word accelerated and draw attention to it. Because I presented this report, for example, a couple of times at Samsonenko's in-person webinar when we were still present at RDNA. And when they started asking questions at the end and comments began, it dawned on me that people didn't understand that it was not just about rotation, but about accelerated rotation. This is a very important circumstance. It creates completely new effects. And today, Vladimir Alexandrovich Chizhov will tell us about how accelerated rotation of bodies affects other bodies and light.
So Vladimir Chizhov was an absolutely brilliant scientist, and it was only because of him that and his experimental prowess that the Soviet Union was able to create the type of fused quartz necessary, or quartz crystals rather, necessary to create very high-powered lasers. This guy isn't a guy that messed around, and as Zatelepin was saying there in the introduction, which I missed, sorry about that, Zatelepin was saying he was the only one to win that extreme esteem prize of the Soviet Union. So really, where to begin on this? Of course, some of you are having all kinds of thinking going on, and it's got your creative juices flowing. But it tells me something, and it's allowed me to hone my understanding of what gravity is. So If you recall, what I've suggested in the past is that a toroidal moment structure is able to capture quanta of clusters of relic neutrinos, that's background inductor capacitor dipoles. That is the base level. These quanta are these larger clusters, these weakly interacting massive particles, and they I imagine are in a range of quanta scales, and they are able to be captured in, that is the chi. And I have argued in the past that the Earth itself is growing, and this was noted by in Neutrino Power by Constantin Mail. He didn't talk about relic neutrinos, he didn't specify that they were these, but he suggested that the Earth was growing and possibly this was something to do with it. Well, I was saying that the electrodynamics in the Earth, the Coriolis forces, the plasma in the core, the magnetic fields, they all conspire to synthesize more matter by creating toroidal moment structures in there. Where I kind of had an issue with that is in the nature of bodies that do not have a magnetic field, do not have a hot internal core, and so on. Now, of course, if you consider all celestial bodies as hollow things with a fractal torus in the middle, then you don't have to consider these things. But, you know, you could argue that things like meteorites, they do still have some, and asteroids, they still have a gravitational effect. And so I kind of like this kind of Shishkin, kind of Dubovik, kind of Coriolis type of ideas, which help me understand my second question in life, which is why the electron keeps spinning if there's no perpetuum mobile. And it was wonderful to hear him saying similar things, that they are actually breathing the ether being these elementary LC dipoles and clusters thereof being the chi, which I consider is the actual life force. And what it could be is that within the toroidal moments of things that are existing within our particular vacuum state and ether structure and chi structure and chi flux, that there is this interchange, as Carols and Dubovik and Shishkin are talking about, that if the electrons are under energized, it will extract a minute amount of energy from the flux that's coming through the core of the atom, and it will expel these clusters with a slightly denuded kinetic energy. So that is one way. At the extremist level, I would consider that it might actually be consuming a quanta of them, and this is how I have described a gravitational well. So you might have a flux of these things going through the center of a nuclei, and out of it comes a slightly denuded flux. And the challenge I've had in my thinking was, if it's still outputting the same amount of material, but en masse it is, because it's like if everything's coming in, if it isn't able to eject stuff to keep in balance, how does it keep if it's not building matter within there, like the expanding Earth, if it's like an asteroid, how does it still maintain this so-called gravitational effect? Well, it could be radiating out photons that not necessarily in the thermal range. Certainly, if something is coming out of the top and it's a neutral structure and it has a lower kinetic energy, then its thermal signature, its photonic signature is going to be lower. So something along those lines is where I'm settling. The other thing is, it could actually in when you make larger structures of these, it maybe is collating energy inside, into its own little kind of black hole in that phase singularity, and that is providing the gravitational well. But sometimes it might be ejecting stuff out that is changed from a structure, a closed structure, into a photon beam, and the photon beam has no mass, as it were, and it's a vibration that's coming out. And I've been looking for something to explain the reason why the EVOs in our experiments will orbit around each other in their forward direction. I've always talked about this forward-looking kind of beam that's coming out. And actually, one of the most important slides that I've shared in the past about this is this one, where we have 3 EVOs that are interacting, but the forward beam is interacting with another one. So this forward beam is causing this one to bend round it. And it doesn't care about the anode here or the cathode. It only cares about structures that are similar to it, that have kind of like a boundary over which there is a close spin effect going on. And so we now can understand from the structure that we've derived from experiment how that kind of spin occurs, because of these kind of structures forcing the spin around. And so anything going through the middle and being cohered from the outside by the other beams coming in are going to end up in a vortex and coming out as a spin beam. And so I almost see this as a kind of aero spike that comes out of the front of an exotic vacuum object. And then what it's doing is it is folding. So basically on the apple here, you have this kind of golden ratio emission of kind of spin waves that come out, and it folds the ether around the outside and then shoves it up its bum, as well as pulling clusters and matter through into the phase singularity. But when it gets here, some will go out in a beam. Now this might have its energy slightly reduced, which is to keep the overall system going. But the net moment is that you have a higher pressure here and a depressurization here, and it moves in a direction. And so it can capture energy from the environment, and because you're removing the thing that prevents you going faster than light, that is the chi, the clusters in front, you're moving them away and you're actually pushing them behind you. It enables this faster than light propulsion. And when we come to faster than light communication, whatever this speed is going, this seems to be going out faster, but also you've got what is called scalar waves. And it's interesting because if you go and look at the 1986-87 EV A Tale of Discovery conclusion in Ken Scholder's book, he's talking about the basic EVO is an ideal monopole oscillator. And this is very important, especially if you don't have asymmetric oscillations. That is to say, you have a hysteresis where you have a sharp rise and then a fall off. And I think all of this is based on spin, but also a kind of ratcheting type effect. So there are these propulsion technologies where they use either electromagnetic pulses or they'll physically have an object and they move it quickly, and then the other one follows up behind it. It moves it quickly and it follows up behind. And you can say it's to do with Casimir and so forth like that. But I think that all of the technologies need to be pulsed to be living. That is to say, I'll give you some examples and of what I'm saying here. And I think the most basic example is the heart. The heart pushes and it comes back, pushes and it comes back. And I think life knows this inherently. And why is this important? Well, the thing is, when you create any pressure wave in a system, the pressure is transmitted via electrons. And the electrons manifest electrodynamics when you have that pulse. And of course, then you've got the fluid moving through all of the capillaries and blood vessels in the body, and that shock pulse coming out from the heart produces toroidal vortices in the body. And I think the heartbeat is the key to life. And I think all systems that will want to cohere and manage chi in any sense will need a heartbeat. And when you think about it, and I did a little bit of a grokking earlier today on this subject. When you think about it, the more heartbeats you have, typically for creatures that live in a similar environment, that is to say, mammals tend to live on Earth. So if you look at this, a mammal here, it's a factor of size, metabolic rate, variability in metabolic rate, and the number of heartbeats. So you can see here, hopefully, if I've got it large enough for you, that Etruscan shrew, I hope I've said that right, 1.5 years of life with a resting heart rate, this is before it does any work, of 835 beats per minute. Okay, it's about 1.8 grams. This is a very small little mammal, very, very small. It has a 28-day gestation and it lives for only 1.5 years. If we go up to the house mouse, we've got 550 heartbeats, significantly less than this, but it is also significantly larger. 20 days, less gestation, that's why they fill your house up quickly if you get an infestation. 2 years though, so very much larger, significantly lower heartbeat, but we've got 33% more lifespan here. Get to a dog, 95, very massive reduction here in heart rate. Obviously it's not that much different, well, it's very, very much different rather in kilograms in weight, but we're seeing not 2 years but 12 years, so 6 times as many, and of course 3 times as many here in terms of gestation period. Human, 79 years, 80, so quite a bit less than domestic, but a lot more years. But of course, then we're averaging at about 3 times the size. Now, it works against you if you're not an optimal weight. And of course, we've got much longer gestation here. Now, a blue whale, of course, is not on land. We have land, 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 land. Blue whale is living in a very different environment, but very long life. It's the average lifespan, 85 years. So that is older than Dennis Bushnell, and younger than Melvin Miles, right in the middle between those two. But 9 beats per minute, 9 beats per minute, and look at the weight, massive, absolutely colossal weight. And so that's the heart in mammals. And what am I really talking about here? I'm talking about the actual initial push. I haven't got the correct terms here. There's probably some doctors in the house that would know that. But the actual push is a pulse. It's a sharp pulse, and that is creating the environment in the entire body for life processes, which I believe are driven by toroidal moments. And you know, how much energy do you need to get from that? Well, here we have birds. Of course, birds live in a similar kind of environment. They're mostly in the air, not on the land. House sparrow, 3 years, 450, but 30 grams. This is a bit of an outlier here. It's only 4 grams. It's got a higher heartbeat and it has a longer half-life. Half-life. It has a longer life than a house sparrow. But of course it does, you know, it lives on rich nectar, and there's something to be said about that. Perhaps we all need to eat more honey, because maybe honey has some very special properties. Okay, so here we go, a lot lower heart rate here than that, and much higher mass, and it's got a longer life. Chicken is a bit an outlier because it's a really heavy bird that can't fly. Of course, chickens are often cared for, and animals that live in captivity often are living much longer. Resting heart rate 250, so it's actually higher, but it has a higher years. And the gold macaw there, beautiful bird, 275. Again, it's a heavy bird, but it's not a ground bird. So a macaw will have to go through high levels of exertion flying, which a chicken doesn't have to do. Okay. Reptiles actually typically are all on land. So let's see their pattern. 5 years for a panther chameleon. Very long day. A very long day, long gestation in the egg. 170 grams, 60 beats per minute. Bearded dragon, 40 beats per minute, double the lifespan, and quite significantly heavier. Very good trend here. 42 beats per minute here, about the same, but heavier and a little bit longer life. But these, you can imagine, there is a difference in how they exert themselves during their life. Ball python here, lower heart rate, nearly over 3 times the weight, much longer life. And Galapagos tortoise there, obviously we know that all lives for a stupid amount of time, but 8. It has about 8, and the heart rate of a blue whale is 9. So, so if you can lower your heart rate, then and it's similar to insects are completely different because they have completely different types of lives. They kind of have the trend, but they don't. You know, so depending on the mass, they tend to get longer lives. Like this beetle at 1 gram as 1 year, whereas the 10 milligram mayfly has 1 day. Okay, but the trend is a bit off because they're very different lives. They have different levels of pupation, gestation time. I hate the mosquito though because it lives for 10 days and it only gestates for 2 days. That's like evil. Okay, that's my personal gripe about mosquitoes. So when we're talking about life, I argue, and I did this at Tesla Tech, and I did this recently at the conference in Czech Republic here. I argue that life-giving technologies are giving your body something which it can use rather than having to make it itself. And before I go into that, I just want to talk about something which we have seen in many different technologies. And that is that there is this 2-day structure. And I think that is what Ivan Filimonenko was seeing in the 1950s when he was doing the classified Soviet palladium and deuterium cold fusion technology. It's interesting that that is contemporary with this Austrian guy claiming cold fusion in the late 1940s, early 1950s. But he said it would shield radiation. I'll come on to that. Of course, Zverblis and Nevesky saw this phantom, and the phantom was an electromagnetic phantom that could be detected by its oscillating magnetic field. It could be moved around, but if you didn't move it, it would stay there, and it'd be like quantum locked. Now, the way I look at it, the reason it's staying there is because it literally has this bubble. It has this bubble. It has this bubble. this bubble that we see in various of these technologies, but this literal bubble that we have here. And it's a different space-time in there, and on the boundary it has things that both capture and repel. And so it's kind of like, because it's neutral, it doesn't supposedly, how should we put this? It can stay there and the air can move around it as if it's not there because it doesn't charge interact. Anyway, I think that's kind of what's going on there. And these structures, as I was saying, in Matsumoto, he saw these ring products which lasted for about 2 days. In Uretskoyev's work, he saw these magnetic monopoles that lasted for 2 days. Of course, in Matsumoto's work, which was prior to that, he found them only bound onto iron cathodes. Shishkin, he said that in his rotary cavitator, he couldn't get it to produce the strange radiation track pits in the photographic emulsions. And he had to then move it to another place. And I believe that it's cohering within a sphere boundary, a certain amount of this chi, and then the chi isn't there because the chi is like a gel. That's the gel over which light travels. And that becomes important to what Klimov shared at the last ball lightning and cold nuclear transmutation conference in Russia, where his inflow vortex plasma reactor, when he ran it, he had a gamma source, and the detections of gamma went down for about 2 days. And I think it's exactly what Ivan Filimenenko was claiming from his palladium deuterium boiling water reactor in the 1950s, in that it would shield radiation because it cannot travel. And this is exactly what Dennis Bushnell was saying, is that you don't see the gamma coming out of these systems because it can't. It gets, his concept is that the heavy electrons are converting it into thermal. Well, the system which is created by clusters of electrons, I believe, is what's doing it, and it's within this bubble. And so the gamma system of Dennis Bushnell is kind of speaking to the same thing as Ivan Filimenenko and Anatoly Klimov, Filimenenko in the 1950s and Klimov reporting last year. And of course, we have Bogdanovich's long-lived plasmoids, okay, where they live for 2 days. All of these systems, and there are other examples, but all of these systems see these structures that I believe are creating a little bubble. They're spun up enough so that they can exist, and they take time to spin down when they are self-sustaining. And I've argued why that is and how you get to the point of self-sustaining. And unless you feed them, that is to say, you bring more matter into their field of capture, or you have a flux of chi moving into their field of capture, they will start to spin down. And their natural life is around about 2 days. So, why is this important? Because anything, in my view, where I am now, that would be good for life, if it's not continually maintained, would only be good for around about 2 days, other than its basic calorific and nutritional value. Now, this is not a health advice. I'm not giving you health advice, but I think water treatment systems, energizing systems, and literally fresh fruit and vegetables are at their best in the 2 days before they're kind of taken off the tap of being exposed to daylight. Why? Because the day is 1 day, isn't it? It's like, and even if you are living in the northern hemisphere in the winter, you know, you still get some exposure from the sun, and it is being established in the work of Zatelepin and Baranov and Shishkin that these chi flux, the energy solitons, can be transported by light. That is to say, if you've got a flux of light coming towards you, you've got a flux of this chi coming towards you. Okay? So if you've absorbed it from the environment, like you're a plant and you're growing, and it's the end of the day, you're not getting anything from the environment. So you have to switch over modes. You're not capturing chi now. And I just don't think photosynthesis is all about just photonic energy. I think there's chi going on. And so what I would argue is that this was encoded in the Great Pyramid. The pyramid works, it's spun up in the day and it cools down in the night, but before the systems run out, which takes 2 days, it's been identified they take 2 days to spin down, right? It spins itself up again because it gets exposed to the flux, right? And so I think this is why it's very important, and I'm learning that I need to treat my own body better. I need to expose myself and enjoy the circadian rhythm. I've known for a long time it's very important to go out and be in the day. But this gives real clarity to me about why that would be, because you need that pulse and you need to be exposed to it. So what am I saying is that if you have a water system, you need to consume that water within 2 days of its production. The water isn't going to be the same all the time. Now, it might have the nascent energetic structures that are easier to energize in there, but I would argue you really want it within 2 days. So a system that produced, let's say, vortex water is good for up to 2 days. And how is this benefiting the body? I think it's benefiting the body because it's compensating for your heartbeat having to do the work of creating these energetic structures. Do you get me? It is actually helping you. You are taking into your body water or fruit or vegetables, or getting it from nascently from the environment, in a way that is your body has to do less work. So I'm proposing tonight a reasoned, in my view, scientific and completely logical way about how these various so-called health technologies will actually work and when they will fail to work, and the reason why you would eat microgreens, for instance, the reason why it's important to, have mushrooms or oysters, let's say. These are really living things. To eat the fruit from the tree, not take the fruit, zap the living daylights out of it with cobalt-60 radiation and leave it on the shelf for 2 months. No, that's not it. It's to try and eat the really fresh stuff. And I think when you're doing that, you're giving your body this boost because your digestive system works. Hopefully most of the stuff that comes in is the bits that you don't need are passed out within 2 days, right? So your body is, the whole thing about your body is it's designed to process your ingested food. And it's giving you, in my view, something that will literally assist your heart and mean that your heart has to work less. And apparently you've got something like 1.5 or so billion heartbeats that an average mammal can have in their lives. And so if you've got a much lower heart rate, you can live for longer, depending on your weight and circumstances and metabolic rate. But, think about what causes stress in people. Typically, things that stress people, think about the effect of stress. It tends to raise your heart level and lead to a shorter life, doesn't it? Because your heart is having to work harder to do something. People say take exercise because your heart will be trained and then you'll have a lower heart rate at different times. I don't know. This is my nub of my argument. I think there are certain things that you can ingest, and I think that with this understanding, we will know explicitly what is good for us, and that this will enable less stress on the overall body to do the work of generating these principal energetic structures that are necessary for us to live our life and have good cognitive abilities. Now, that is biology using this. I think the planet does the same thing. I think the pyramid was a perfect example of a system that knows exactly how nature works and the cycle that it works on. I think that, you know, the rotation of the Earth is absolutely perfect. It might be that it's all linked together with our local ether, vacuum, energy state or whatever. But let's look at a few technologies which we know, or we have good arguments that work. The thunderstorm generator. It works on the vacuum, pulsed vacuum of the overall system. Well, what is that? It's a shock change. It's a shock change. And as that is, the vacuum is pushing in the water, and that flashes to steam, or even charge separates with thermocatalytic splitting, that is causing a shock through the whole system. And the whole what that's doing is it's producing a strong pulse, and it's causing acceleration, an increasing acceleration as it comes in. This is exactly what is being said by Chisov. It's the increasing acceleration. Now, let's think about the Huang generator. The Huang generator has a resonant injector, which is doing a pulse in. Same thing. The Cavijet is doing a pulse. It can bore through rock 4 times faster. The Klimov vortex reactor is doing an explosive pulse erosive discharge. Okay? And cavitation starts out with a shock. Now, what is important with each of these systems is not just the initiation of the structures, it's the spinning them up, adding helicity. In the case of the TSG, the thunderstorm generator, as it goes through the pipe, which I am telling Malcolm right now, if he puts some spiraling inside that pipe, inside those things, I think he will see an even better effect. That's for free, Malcolm. That's for you. Okay? But of course, in the Huang generator, we already had rifled tubing inside. And as the water's going through the pipe, it's doing shear, producing a toroidal vortex that way. And as it's spinning this way, it's got a toroidal vortex that way. It's got multi-axis shear, introducing helicity into the initiated structures from the shock. Okay? Again, with the Klimov vortex reactor, you have a plasma. It's shocked, comes through, produces a toroidal vortex that is then injected with helicity from the beams coming in from the MPC. And then in cavitation, general cavitation, that is what you want. Okay, so that is the initiation of these structures and the spinning of them in the body. The body's heart in living things creates the pulse that produces the shock, that produces the shear, that produces the vortex structure. Then the flowing through the pipes and the capillaries are what keeps helicity in there and keeps the thing working. And so I think that a technology that works will have a heartbeat. So look at the Lion reactor. It had oscillations going on with the ripple on the power supply. Look at Tesla's devices, a disruptive discharge. Same thing with the SV Adamenko proton 21 lags, a disruptive discharge, and it's a unipolar discharge. That is to say, it's moving in one direction. It's like a ratchet effect. It's going up, or it's going. You're building and building and building, right? There's no time for it to go back. And here's one thing that I'm thinking about, that this work by Chisov inspired me. Why is our universe geared to create life? I think it's because we predominantly have a certain spin, in a left-handed spin in the universe, and we are working with our tool is the electrons. The electrons seem to be able to cluster into these fractal toroidal structures, and they have a certain spin, and so on. Now, in the mirrorverse, the antiverse, where it's the equivalent life-giving structures in the mirrorverse, they are the positrons, okay? And so I think what's happening is you are tending towards life through electrons because they have a particular directionality in their overall action. So these are some of the thoughts I had. And the disruptive pulse is ripping this gel medium, this chi, from the environment, because it's stable up to a threshold. There's a critical threshold where you literally rip the life force out of the surrounding medium. Okay, and if you're gently doing that, it kind of is always settling down and compensating. Okay. Yeah, have I got... So yeah, the whole topic of a phantom, in my view, in Verbalis, the phantom was an area of space-time, a little bubble that was depleted in ether within a boundary. And the structure that did the depletion is the oscillating structure that's in there. The same with why Shishkin couldn't see production of these dents in his emulsions after a while of running the cavitator. Okay, so that's some of the things I wanted to talk about that came out of that for me. So just very briefly, he what am I saying here? Yeah, so maybe I can do this with I don't know. No, maybe I won't. I'll see if you've got any questions there. Hello, EBB. Thanks for joining us back here. Yeah, I think the impulse provides the increasing acceleration, and it's an unidirectional impulse, unidirectional impulse, unidirectional impulse. And that means that, that after you've done the impulse and you've gone everything in the direction you want to go, the ether kind of catches up and fills in behind. And so this is kind of what that guy was saying that I opened the presentation with. But I don't know how well he understood it. I just don't know how well he understood it. Yeah, so in the case of cavitation with water, you have the bubble and then it collapses. In the collapsing process, it produces spin. And around the standing wave nodes, you get vortex and anti-vortex. And so you have all of the means to do both yin and yang in those systems. It's a really incredible beauty of nature. And as I've said before, you know, when you cause the cavitation bubble, you create charge separation in that process, which produces a lot of electron gas, as it were, which can aid in the process. Good night, Deja Vu. So well done, Malcolm. Global production started, he says. The India goal is 100,000 24-inch to 18 inches, 12-inch thunderstorm generators per day. Wonderful. Absolutely awesome. Wonderful. Yeah, so I don't know if you caught what I was saying, Malcolm, but it's in all of these systems, whether it is living organisms with their heartbeat, or technological systems like your system or the Huang generator or Klimas vortex reactor, just cavitation in general, or the SV Adamenko system. It's a pulse and then a feed, a pulse and then a feed, and then a pulse and then a feed. And once you've created the structures, you need to introduce helicity to improve the system. Yeah, Shaq Paranoff Squirrel saying Shaq Paranoff's device too. Yeah, in the case of Shaq Paranoff, he conditioned the system with standing waves, in my understanding, nodes RF to create monopoles in the copper, which were bound in the metal, and then he gives it a sharp shock to release them all. And so this is what I'm saying about health-giving processes. If you are able to create these structures and you able to get them into the body, then your body will be able to make use of them to offset its requirement to produce these things itself. And there will be quanta that are correct for human physiology. Deja Vu says, sprout your seeds and eat before you eat them. Yes, I agree. Yeah. Okay, Paul, see you later. Okay, I'm just going to do a quick run over. Essentially, we talked effectively about cohering, and this is all about cohering. It's about bringing matter together and getting its phase interaction so it can occupy the same space-time and work collectively together. And it is a phase change. It is a change from a decoherent state to a coherent state where the matter can occupy the same space-time. And I think this is the thing that allows gravity to occur. And the opposite is true. And I really appreciate the fact that Chisov, this very respected Soviet-era scientist, argued, as I have done in the past, that both Nino Kalagina's work of telekinetic powers and the action and propulsion methods that are evident but not fully explained in ball lightning are due to manipulation through this torsion reactive process. That is to say, I think it's embedded when you're just spinning something like this. It's only one aspect. It's only one orthogonal plane. You know, electromagnetism are at 90 degrees to each other. So when you have X, Y, Z rotating superconducting loops, and let's say they are shocking and they're oscillating, I think net, because you are dealing with things that are only left-hand spin, it ratchets in one way. And so it coheres in one way unless you force it. And that's where the charge separation may be playing a role. But this was Ode phase change cohering. This is a simulation of a super wave in the ocean where waves constructively interfere to create shocking outcomes. And water, I think, is the best way to achieve many of these systems. With full respect to Melvin Miles and his contribution to the field, sadly passed away on October the 20th. I only met him in ICCF 20 in 2016 in Sendai. I had some great interchanges with Dennis Bushnell, former chief scientist at NASA for over 2 decades, who sadly passed away on the same day. But sometimes we are given a gift when all sadness is upon us, and that is that there is an acceptance that global boiling may not be the narrative that we need to curtail our one short lives as a result of, and neither should we be demanding a prison of our own intellect in a so-called cyber peace, in a neo-utopia of a technocratic society. I think you need to get out into nature. You need to live the rawness of nature and feel it energize you. Get outside more. And the ideas that we're having here obviously were known to these pre-war German scientists, or at least well understood by, or Austrian scientists by 1950s. I reckon that Richter must have talked about these things, Dr. Ronald Richter, by at least 1952-53, where he says, we assume that highly compressed electron gas plasma becomes a detector for energy exchange with what we call 0-point energy. On the basis of its exchange coupling, it seems to be possible to extract a compression proportional amount of 0-point energy by means of magnetic field controlled energy exchange fluctuations between the compressed electron gas and a sort of cell structure in space representing what we call 0-point energy. I believe that this is the science that was classified in the 1950s. It is the key to all hidden technology. I've said it many, many times. It doesn't matter whether we look forward in time, look at experiments, or look backward in time. The answer is all the same. It is all the same. We are at the beginning of an old age. The new dawn of an old age, no less. And you guys have been along for the ride. I think what has been done by Chisov in these experiments, which I'm looking forward to. I have a bunch of lasers here. I just need to get myself a, there we go. So we got a kind of dual pumped violet laser here. And we got a red one here. I've got a green one in the drawer. Be interesting to see if they change at all. But I need to get myself a variable speed angle grinder and give it a go. And the one with the water and the alcohol and the iodine, those are simple experiments you can do. And if they are verified and we can't find another explanation for them, well, it's going to be interesting days. So with that, I will say thank you very much for your time. And I'll just go through the wonderful donations. We've had some very generous donations today. Firstly, thank you, Matthew Reynolds, for your donation there. Thank you, Gary Johnson. Skoggy Hoggins, Alduan X, Benenator again, thank you very much. Black Tie, and again Matthew Reynolds. It's really, really appreciated. It really helps. So with that, I will say buenas noches, dobranoc, and good night. This was Ode Phase Change, and I think we are definitely getting there. Peace.